Be a man of bravery, go quick as say kick. Be a man of bravery, go quick as say kick. This is what you are, go quick as a hoka. This is what you are, go quick as a hoka. Bayede, ingosi, bayede, ingosi, bayede, ingosi, bayede, ingosi, This is what you are.
WorldSkills Africa WSAS2022 2022. It's just a few minutes after 1900 hour Central African time. We're coming to you live from the Dome here in WSAS2022. I'm Patrick Sam, and this is Skills Talk, where we take an in-depth look into technical vocational education training. In the show tonight, we look at the topic of value of the TVET in youth development. And this is particularly because there are growing problems of youth unemployment in Africa, which is a major concern for the growing population that is expected to be 60% of the world's population by 2035. Now, according to recent World Bank estimates, about 10 million young people leave formal school on an annual basis. Now, you can imagine the kind of lack of opportunities that are there for young people to then transcend themselves into a market, whether that be a formal or informal job market, is some of the issues that face young people's mobility here on the continent. And is WorldSkills Africa the solution to this? Obviously, the topic this year is promoting skills development in the 21st century for sustainable economic growth and African ownership. Now, that's a mouthful, and to help me make this consumable, bite-sized, to cut this elephant down to size and make us understand how significant this is for national development, I'm joined by an esteemed panel here tonight. Starting here to my left, Dr. Raimo Naanda, who is the Deputy Executive Director in the Higher Education, Technology and Innovation Ministry. Good evening and welcome here to Skills Talk.
Good evening, Patrick. Good evening, listeners.
Obviously, we want a change in perceptions as well, and we think about vocational training, and you want to see boys or men here, but to change that stereotype, we're joined by a young lady who is obviously a competitor here as well, Euphrasia, Mulenga. Welcome to Skills Talk. Last but not least, Namibia, we obviously have the privilege of being in the company of the president of WorldSkills International, the global movement, Mr. Humphries. Good evening and welcome to Skills Talk.
Good evening, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me here tonight.
So, I think last night in the opening ceremony that obviously was broadcasted live, you at home had the opportunity to join us. We've had shows all day with some of our co-presenters. But to start tonight's topic on, Mr. Naanda, we really want to talk about the value of TVET. And I want to start with a quote that the minister said yesterday in her speech that says, "You can't expect to meet the challenges of today with yesterday's tools and expect to be in business tomorrow." What does that mean?
Yeah, no, thank you, Patrick. Of course, if you look at where we are coming from as the global world, things have transcended. For example, if you look at the first industrial revolution, was sent out around the steam engine. And then we came into the second industrial revolution, which was to do with mass production. And then the fourth industrial revolution moved into the IT space. And today we are in the fourth industrial revolution, which is talking about artificial intelligence and Internet of Change. So, of course, you see, you need to understand where you are coming from and where we are going. Now, that's very important for us as a sector of technical and vocational education and training to see how best the world is moving for us to respond to the past challenges and to the future challenges going forward. Because if you don't understand where we are coming from, you would not understand where the world is going to. The world is moving into robotics. The world is moving into Internet of Change. And of course, we need to be prepared for this kind of developments.
Okay. Euphrasia, when you hear that as a young person, what resonates in your heart?
Really, what comes to my mind is yesterday we lived in a world where we did not have phones. Our parents did not have phones. And now I'm in this world where I actually own a smartphone. And now the much younger generation actually, at a very early age, they're able to operate a smartphone, which can actually tell you that the world is revolving and we need to do something about that. We need to, the way that we are training them, the way that we are teaching them has to revolve with what is happening currently.
Mr. Humphries, we obviously know WorldSkills International has been coming many years. We know that the Africa focus has been since 2019. Why all of a sudden a specific focus on the African region for WorldSkills? What does it serve your institution?
Patrick, we actually started our new focus on Africa about 2014 when we realized that, we looked at our membership and realized that here's a continent of 54 nations, 1.2 million population, and we only had 5 African members and only 2 from sub-Saharan Africa. And we realized that although we only have 80 plus members, this is serious underrepresentation. And with the second thing we realized is that Africa, of course, because of its very young population, it has two issues facing it. One, it has the potential to be the powerhouse of tomorrow because a population that young gives you a talented, motivated labor force that is second to none. And that is a huge plus. But the other side of this is that we need to make sure that those young people have access to the skills training that is appropriate for today and, much more importantly, will serve them for tomorrow. And your quote from the Minister was hugely relevant here. If employers themselves aren't ensuring that their own workforce is keeping up to date with skills and young people aren't getting technical and vocational education that is absolutely current with today and tomorrow's requirements, then we are actually sending those young people down a dead end. So it's important to actually change both. And WorldSkills realized that and said it's time to get Africa fully up to speed.
Mr. Naanda, when we hear that, a quick question is obviously we want economic growth, but ultimately we want human development to take place for young people. And in that, having a skilled human capital is almost a precondition for knowledge-based economy, but also, you know, to ensure some of these visions of the countries, but of the continents as well. So who's responsible for that? Do you share it? Or what's your role as government, and who are the other stakeholders that need to be on the table?
You see, if you unpacked the human capital theory, it basically informs you that if you have a more educated person, then you have a more productive citizen. In other words, we need to invest. We need to invest in skills development, both from the public sector, the private sector, and let alone the parents in the society. Because if we don't invest in our human capital, there is no way that we can improve the productivity levels and also to improve the economic levels of our country. And that's why it is necessary for TVET to do this, because we believe that TVET is an enabler to address the social needs of our people, as well as to increase the productivity levels of our societies and our economies.
Euphrasia, you know, at a policy level, especially in a country like Namibia, documents are well crafted. We hear the vision here, there are frameworks that exist. But let's talk from a grassroots perspective. You know, a young person, what is a young person's reality when they're not exposed to things like TVET? And how does that reality change, like yourself, being, you know, representative of so many other young people? How does that reality change after you've been exposed to something like WorldSkills?
Having competed for WorldSkills, and that was in 2017, Abu Dhabi. When you are preparing and actually getting to the competition, you have no idea what to expect or what is going to go on. And specifically for me, it happened in a time when I did not really have a place in the industry. I was just an apprentice. And having gone to the competition and came back, I was sort of a kind of person who was maybe slowly losing hope because I wasn't seeing the hope. I thought, okay, fine, I have studied for 3 years, I've gotten my diploma, but I don't see my place in the industry. So having an opportunity to sit down with fellow youths from other countries who were actually much experienced, firstly, I was challenged because then I thought within me, this is a young person who has studied exactly what I have studied. So if they can do it and they've come this far, I believe I can do it. And it sort of awakened the passion within me. I didn't get into it for the job, I got into it because of the passion. And also to show the women out there to say, even we women can do it, because it's not common to find women in such a field.
Wow, that's very inspirational. Mr. Humphries, when you hear young people speak like that, this is not an opportunity, especially for young women, you know, that's given to every single or for the majority. It's a very marginal type of, you know, access that's provided. But last night's speech, when you spoke, you raised the stakes and you say, you know, WorldSkills is not just about the skill, it's about the innovation and the entrepreneurship. Mr. Humphries, are you selling us dreams?
No, well, I suppose I am, but it's a dream that I think's achievable. And that's the important thing. Yeah. The reality is that today's young people are different, and the society they're growing up with is different, and the opportunities they have through technology are different. Think about how many young people today have set up on their own extraordinary social media businesses, new innovations in technology, things that I, as an old person, struggle to even have thought of, and yet they're creating real business models out of things that to me are very new. And we make a huge mistake if we don't recognize that and seek to capture and give them the opportunity for more. That means we have to constantly update and modernize our TVET provision. We have to make people see what is possible. Euphrasia is an aircraft and maintenance engineer, a senior one now in her business. How many girls would look at that career? When she told the schools at One School, One Country yesterday of her job, they gasped, because they couldn't believe that a woman could achieve that. But they can today. And what we have to do is let young people see what they can be. The problem with VET, and in many VET programs, TVET programs, is that young people can't see women in these technical jobs. But the truth is they're there, and we have to help them to see them, and then we have to help young people. This is what this event does. Every young person coming through here today has been seeing young people doing jobs I bet they'd never heard of, other than cooking.
Well, when you speak about youth unemployment, Mr. Naanda, and we see, you know, percentages around 43%, particularly in countries like Namibia, what is the turnaround time for to say, you know, when we've had concerted, obviously, efforts, not just WorldSkills, but other interventions that come to give young people opportunities of access and mobility, when do we expect to feel and transcend these inputs into the outcomes that we desire?
Patrick, I need to be honest and frank with you. This should have been done yesterday already. Because if we don't do it today, we are going to sit on a serious time bomb. You know, the population of the youth in Africa is growing at an exponential rate. And if we don't give opportunities to this youth, we are really going to feel the impact tomorrow. And therefore, it is very crucial for us to do whatever we can today to make sure that as a matter of urgency, we give the opportunities to the youth so that they can make a difference, so that they can enter the mainstream economy of these countries. If we don't do that, I'm afraid we are going to sit on a serious time bomb. So it means we should do it like yesterday for the youth to really get these opportunities for them to enter.
Address the skills shortage that we've experienced in this country. by having these initiatives? Can we, or what more is required? Is there fuel in this vehicle? Do we need more resources? How do we make it happen for most young people?
Of course, other countries, the developed countries have taught us, and we have learned from them that it can be done. I mean, if you look at other developing countries, the youth unemployment rate is very, very low. And what we need to do is to understand what strategies they have implemented. And we know the strategies they have implemented. Apprenticeship programs, for example, where the youth get an apprentice opportunity to get a job with an employer and an opportunity to go to school. And that's what we need to do, and to entice our employers, our industries, to take in these apprentices. If we don't do that, I'm afraid we're not going to address this opportunity.
And just to finish off with you on this part, is the intervention systemic or is it ad hoc?
No, we have a planned strategy. For example, in our case in Namibia, we have a strategic approach where we are looking at developing a national framework for internships, for apprentices, and for work integrated learning. Because through such a framework, we believe we'll be able to increase the opportunities for youth to secure employment opportunities while they're working. And that's what other countries have done. For example, in Germany.
To talk to us a little bit about, but since we're here, what does a work integrated program or learning environment look like? What does it mean to the nation? What other opportunities are there that they might not know about that they can learn right now?
Work integrated learning actually means that you get an opportunity to learn at the workplace. You see, in other words, is to transfer the theoretical content that you have learned at the learning institution at the workplace, where you get support from the employer as well as your lecturer, because your lecturer should come and visit you at your workplace to really see whether what you have learned theoretically you are putting in place practically.
So there's a shift from the classroom to the workplace?
No, it's not basically a shift.
Okay.
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
It's a combination of both, where you are putting your theory in practice in a real working environment.
So there's a combination. Euphoria, who is TVET for? Who is it for? If it's in the African continent, as people are watching, how do they identify? That might be something for me. Who is it for?
I would be compelled to say the youth, but it's for everyone, because everyone has a skill, and that shouldn't take it away from you. It doesn't matter what age you are. If you have the skill, you have it.
Okay. And why is it that then it becomes a male-dominated sector, and why is it that boys are more inclined and there's more of an enabling environment in the context to recruit young men versus young women who many of the times, do most of the work in terms of workforce globally, but get the least of the returns? So is there a continuation of this gender stereotype and gender disparity in TVET?
We still do have it, and it actually narrows down to a moment when somebody is actually very small. And this is something that I feel is driven by our culture, society, and upbringing. From a little age, you're able to expose the young ones to do what they're supposed to do. I had the opportunity to be exposed to engineering and mechanics by my father, because then he did not feel this is not for ladies. But the moment in a home setup, a parent or a society will feel this is what's meant for the ladies and this is what's meant for the men, it's instilled in them, and they kind of grow up with that. So they have it within them to say, this is for what's men and this is what's for ladies. But then when you expose them, they will choose what they will do best. They'll choose their passion. And when you're passionate about something, you fight hard to see it work.
So would you say that some of these stereotypes exist to keep women traditionally on the margins? Is that part of the patriarchy that could exist in this context? And how do you break it then? How do you create other realities for young girls like yourself?
It is there, and this is how we are breaking it. To recognize the people who've actually broken the ice and stood out to be in the male-dominated, use them to raise awareness and to inspire and encourage others. You have to use them as role models, because people or youths have to see sometimes to believe. You cannot be what you haven't seen. You should be able to see and to imagine it. When a young lady out there is watching, I have a small body, I look young, they will envision and picture themselves I'm small, I'm young, I can still do engineering. That's the
But how do you deal with the day-to-day kind of misogyny and the people who doubt you in what you do and whether you're capable? I mean, there's one thing to have the skill and there's one thing to be accepted and acknowledged for that skill.
you always have to remind yourself to say, this is my passion. I have trained. I am qualified in this. I might not look like I have the muscle, but I have the understanding.
Yeah.
And you should be able to prove it and inspire them. It's always going to be there. People will have different challenges, but
challenges?
like you said, sometimes to be undermined. Whenever somebody walks through the room and is asking for something, they'll want to more ask the male than the female concerning anything to do with engineering. You would find that. And sometimes we would find that most companies would have to employ more men compared to women, because then they feel they have more manpower as compared to the ladies. So that was the challenge in my area. But then it's not a challenge for every other person out there. So challenges are still going to be there, but when you're passionate about something, nothing takes you down.
What's your mantra? When you get up and you go to work and you know that's the reality that you face, it's male-dominated, what's the mantra?
To actually get out there and do my thing, achieve something, I always prove something to myself to say, you know what, I have a challenge, I have done. And I can also tell people to not be scared of challenges, because that's the only way you are going to know what you can take and what you cannot take. Perhaps maybe in the past, I wouldn't have been able to sit here, but actually being exposed to skills, champion trust, a few training, I'm able to sit here and do this. Yeah. So you sort of have to challenge yourself sometimes. Wake up in the morning and tell yourself, today I'll try something new.
You're just not doing it, you're changing hearts as you add it. So keep on doing it. Mr. Humphries, quality's got to be a conversation that we got to have. It's one thing to have an intervention. What are some of the key quality assurance components that need to be kind of implemented throughout the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes? How do we ensure that what we envision is where we're going to be?
The first thing I would say, and I think it's absolutely essential, is that you need to engage with industry in the design of your education programs in TVET. The reality is that anyone that has taught in a college for 3 years is 3 years out of touch with best practice. 50 years ago, that wasn't an issue. The pace of change was very slow. Today, industries have to change their processes, technologies and tools every year. And so we have to keep the curriculum up to date and engage employers in testing it and improving it on a regular basis.
But just to engage you on the significance of industry, is there a difference in terms of the significance in a developing country versus a developed country? Could a possibility be that industry might not be up to date, or the benchmark that you would use in the skills training, and that the training institutions might actually be ahead of the industry?
Yes, absolutely, and that can be true significantly between developed nations and developing nations. The technologies used in developed nations can be newer, more up to date. And the standards we use in WorldSkills seek to measure best practice at the international level. But we also work with nations to help them relate that standard to their businesses. This is why you have to do it on a country-by-country basis, because companies here will say, well, we're not using that technique. We use all of these, but that bit and that bit needs to be adapted for Namibia. That's not hard, as long as you have the starting point and a group of current modern employers around you who you trust as a nation to represent what's best practice. Then it's easy to tailor and adapt to make sure this is right for Namibia, or right for Southern Africa, or right for Africa.
The question is the industry support, beyond just the education aspect, is there a way through these vocational interventions to support industry if they happen to be lagging behind?
That's certainly part of any nation's good industrial development policy. But the reality is if the motor vehicle industry in Namibia is 3 years behind that of Germany, and that's the nature of the cars in this country, then they're the cars you have to work on and repair. But at the same time, if you're building new cars, then you have to actually make sure that that industry is current with best practice, otherwise they won't be competitive. So you have to do it on a national basis. There's no international best practice that is always applicable in every country. You have to have a combination of a knowledge of best practice and an understanding of how to tailor and adapt for your industry at your stage of development. That's why we talk about African ownership. This is not something to bring in from outside.
That's a great transition for me. African ownership, Mr. Naanda, what has worked for us in terms of TVET and African ownership, and what hasn't worked?
I think so far everything has worked, because what we are doing in Africa, we are not doing it in isolation, because what we are doing is we are following the world trends. What is happening in developing countries, of course, have an impact on us, and that's why we need to follow suit. Yes, it is true that we may not really have achieved what developing countries have done, and it's simply because we are lagging behind, not because we want that, but it's because of us not being able to implement the good policies that we have. You know, it's a sort of a makeshift, you know, and we need to blame ourselves as policymakers, because we are creating these beautiful policies, but we are not implementing them. Of course, the reason could be resources, it could be capacity, human capacity to implement what is there. And in most cases, somebody would develop a policy, this person leaves the institution, and then those who are coming on board are not able to implement this kind of policies. And what we need to do as African governments is to make sure that we build capacity when we develop this kind of policies. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that, you know, in Africa, what we really need to do is to learn the best practices, what the developing countries are doing in terms of the implementation of TVET. You know, we are attending all these kind of international conferences where we are learning all these kind of good theories and good terminologies about what we need to do. But in Africa, there is just that weakness that is confronting us and facing us. But it's purely a thing that has to do and bordering around us ourselves.
I'm going to jump just in terms of connecting that idea in terms of the gap, particularly for African nations and how they want to respond to some of these deficits. So what are the areas that you might have identified? Because generally, you know, sometimes you say any challenge is a challenge as a result of governance issues, and you've made that concession. So how do we respond to those deficits?
There are a couple of areas in which we know there is a difference between much of Europe and Asia and practice in Africa around education, and it's mostly and often about access to technology. COVID demonstrated to us that we have to have the flexibility to deliver learning online to people where they are, and for 2 years we've been struggling to get young people back into TVET because it's very hands-on. But down here in this event, you'll see technologies that are in use in Europe to actually teach at a distance, and they can be adapted where the internet is weaker and so on. There are, over the last 2 years, WorldSkills has conducted dozens of experiments around the world to learn how to deliver TVET to young people where the technology is weak or where the learning has to take place at a distance. And very often it's that technology is already in developed nations, tech colleges and schools, but we need to get it in here. So the internet deficit, if you like, is for me a big issue.
But then you're saying that it's not just the skill that's required, it's also the tools that's required. Isn't that not inherently then reproducing a sense of privilege? Because, you know, getting tools and accessing them requires a certain level of privilege, and it's in a developed context. So is that a gap that you could bridge? And just maybe answering you and then moving to Euphoria, did you feel intimidated by not having certain technologies or, you know, better positioned when it comes to TVET?
Okay, so this deficit is an issue and it's real, but it's addressable, and the amazing transformation over the last 3 years in technology has made what is in use in other countries incredibly more available and cheaper now. And so what has happened is that COVID has forced manufacturers to reduce the cost and increase the access in a way that we probably would have taken 10 years to do. And so where this might have been difficult now, The opportunity is there increasingly to spread this around the world. And of course, it's one of the African Union's ambition to do that in Africa.
Is the technology as a disadvantage? Have you turned it into a tool that you can leapfrog with?
It is an advantage. And we can clearly see it to say we youths are using technology. We youths are using social media to get out there. And going back to your question, it can make you feel vulnerable, but I wouldn't want to make somebody want to dwell on that. But instead, look at it as an opportunity to learn and to see better things. I say so because when I went for the competitions, I wasn't familiar with all the tools that were actually there for me. But then it was an option. I could either take that and tell my expert, oh, I do not know all the tools that are here, so then we can go ahead, I'm not able to compete. But then I took it up and said, I wouldn't know everything that's on the floor, but then it's an opportunity for me to familiarize myself with what's here now. It wasn't there then. I have the opportunity to have it now, so let me use the opportunity.
Yes. Can I just contribute onto this one? You see, if we are talking about technology, for example, there is now the new modern technology that we're talking about, 3D printing. People are constructing houses using 3D printing technology. Now, as a country, we cannot ignore this. I mean, we have a backlog of houses in Namibia. We can use 3D printing to develop and build a lot of houses. I mean, we have seen that from Rwanda. Rwanda has shown us they are building a lot of houses in no time using 3D technology, 3D printing technology. So it means we cannot say, no, technology can only be used in developing countries and not in Africa. You know, we need to use best practices.
Okay. How did COVID make the situation any worse? Or, like Chris spoke about the opportunity in the threat that he had identified. Talk to us about maybe at the national level, did COVID exacerbate some of the challenges, or were they able to really give you a quicker turnaround time on some of the problems that you are facing?
You know, when TVET came on board, we literally had to close our TVET centers. And you can imagine what the impact was. We had to close, and this had a serious impact. And of course, what we have learned is to use online learning, like what Chris have said. So we have started introducing online learning now. And what we need to do is use an online learning to increase access to TVET, because we believe that you can simulate training, simulate how to dismantle an engine while you're at home, and not necessarily to get to a workshop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris, some of the issues, other issues that came up during COVID?
Yes, I think TVET suffered more than almost any other form of learning, because there is always an important practical dimension to TVET, and many of the academic courses could be immediately switched online. It's much harder to do that. What we've had is a catch-up period. COVID has actually forced us to develop far more rapidly than we probably would ever have done new technological tools that can make teaching TVET at a distance, or at least doing blended programs for TVET possible, where 2 or 3 years ago it wasn't. So in one way, I think we should be grateful, because it's forced us to accelerate the developments and the cost cutting of those opportunities so they can be spread much more widely around the world. The thing is to grasp them and to help the young people have no problem using them. But what we do have to do is make sure we support the teachers so they know how to use it effectively in teaching.
But you know, the big conversations in the world right now, the World Economic Forum talks about a paradigm shift from an information age to an intelligence age. How does that and the future look like when you're looking at things like automation? The Vice President last night spoke about artificial intelligence. There's been conversations about blockchain and you know, the use of AI, machine learning. Does that up the ante for TVET, or could it possibly pose threats in terms of jobs and the security of that? What does the future look like?
I think it opens up new areas of development and new opportunities and systems. But if just sort of stop for a second and think, whatever happens, If your heating or your refrigeration breaks down tomorrow, it still needs repairing. Your Vice President said this in an interview today. If your lights stop working in your house, they need fixing. If your plumbing stops working, it needs fixing. We need to recognize that there is both the front end, leading edge developments where every nation needs to find its own approach, but there will be a residual, a requirement to support and maintain and develop, which will absolutely require a continuation of very important technical and artisan skills.
Okay. Well, that sounds exciting, because some of the speeches were concluding from the opening ceremony that TVET tools are for the future. TVET is for the future. Is that true?
No.
Is TVET a tool for the future?
It is a tool for the future, yes.
How?
Empower the youth with skills. When you have a skill, what you're sitting and doing right now, I can never take that away from you. Whether you're here or not on set, that is your skill. You can still go home and use it on social media. Come up with your own blog or something like that. We have seen people come up with their own YouTube channels. We youth. So that is your skill. That is what skills can actually do for people. And actually, we need to get to a point where we now encourage them that these skills, as you learn the skills, think of how you would change the world. Think of how you change the nation. Yes, the government has a role to play for us, but then we must also take it up individually. What can we do for Africa? What can we do for the nation?
I think in doing that, and that seems like a big elephant in terms of what we can do, a lot of the things that we've spoken about, the dynamics that go into it. And I think you guys have a framework that kind of looks at the 4 sub-themes within, the bigger promoting skills development. And one of them looks at effective TVET systems. I think you spoke, Mr. Naanda, largely to that. But let's talk a little bit about the aspects of not just funding models, but the use of technology and the accessibility and the availability and things like customs and tariffs that are attached to our understanding of how technology affects our lives. What's the government's position on that?
You see, one need to unpack what TVET means. TVET is not simply learning a skill. TVET means growing an economy. Now, by growing an economy, you need to acquire various skills. You need to be able to use technology to grow your economy. Now, if you look at our government, we have Vision 2030. And Vision 2030 speaks about Namibia becoming an industrialized nation to be developed by its own people. Now, with that, it actually means what we need to do, we need to use the TVET system to become more innovative, more creative, so that we do things that are not available. Bring in something new. We need to use TVET to generate new knowledge that we can use to address the social ills that we have.
But are you then willing to say that as a nation, Namibia will ululate as loud when somebody graduates from a TVET center as, for instance, a traditional higher education institution? Is there as much occupational prestige being embedded in society, in our homes? Is it something that we'll cheer and shout for as loudly in terms of the way we reward and acknowledge our children's contribution to the economy that you're talking about?
I think that's why we have an event like this, Skillwords.
Or what's the status currently is what I want to know. Do we do it or not as a Namibian country?
No, we are doing it.
Okay.
And that's why we brought WorldSkills Africa competition to Namibia, is to really to show the people that we can do it. We can do it simply because this event we are using to benchmark with the best international practices.
And do you see the attitudes and behaviors changing?
Of course.
Of people, families, maybe there's a story you could share with us that you've experienced in terms of this paradigm shift in being open-minded towards understanding that this is as significant as other, traditional careers.
I can assure you, Patrick, it has changed. If you look at Namibia during the past 5 years, before we have introduced WorldSkills, the number of applications that we received for the TVET sector was very, 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 very low. But today, as we're speaking, we are getting in excess of 35,000 applications for people wanting to access the system. Is because people have become aware of the importance of TVET in the country.
The same question applies to you, that issue of occupational prestige. How do we deal with it? That it's,
We celebrate role models. One of the things we've always celebrated with graduates is we've made them public. People celebrate doctors and lawyers. What WorldSkills is about isn't just one competition. When you do it well in a country, you have town, college, regional, national competitions, and you celebrate each one. The mantra that Euphrasia quoted, you can't be what you can't see, is what's bedeviled us. People never saw what an occupation is, but when they come to events like this, which don't just have to happen once, they can be a regular part of social and educational development, then they start to be able to see that these are things I'd like to do. And suddenly we can change the game. And that, for me, is what WorldSkills brings. The opportunity to change the game and actually give every young person the chance to see something they want to be.
If I talk to maybe about a multiplier effect or a situation where somebody saw you and it became their reality. Do you know of any of those stories? Or at the family level where they're like, that's our engineer. Something that is really, that you can witness, that people have come to accept and love the fact that we have a female as a aircraft engineer.
I can say back home, currently I have seen Zambia.
Okay.
Currently I've seen back home the number of ladies that are actually enrolling for aircraft maintenance engineering are quite more than what we had before. So they are slowly getting the news. But it's also just not aircraft maintenance engineering. It can be any skill out there. Same applies to the men. They can also go into skills that are female dominated as long as they have a passion for it, because that is what we want for them to have.
Okay. So as we conclude this discussion, I think it's really around the value for young people, and particularly on the continent, when we know that the world's population by 2035, 60% will be coming from the continent, but currently the average age of an African is 19, and here in SADC it's 27. What does that mean in terms of what you're talking about, the possibility of like triumph and a democratic dividend that we can take as Africans, but also the juxtaposition of that there could be an army of unemployed youth that could lead to some kind of instability. So, Mr. Naanda, when you're talking about TVET being the tool for the future, what is the message that we need to almost replay in ourselves until it becomes organically embedded in how we do business in Namibia?
You see, Patrick, when we talk about skills development, we should not only think about developing skills for own consumption. Africa has the youngest youth population compared to other countries in the world. And therefore, it is very, very critical for us as African nations to develop skills and to export these skills to other countries. You see, the question of high unemployment is a no-go for me. For me, is for us to really invest in skills development so that we can export skills to other countries. I mean, Zimbabwe, we've learned from Zimbabwe as a country. They've exported skills.
But at the same time, just to be a little bit more critical, the per capita investment when a child goes to a TVET center is 4 times higher than like a traditional school. So if you have a dropout, for instance, you're paying double as much per child. So how do we make sure that the investment that we put in has a return?
You see, Patrick, there is this analogy. You either train or you don't train and face the consequences. Yes, it is true. TVET is a very, very, very highly costly investment. It's because of the materials that you need to use to train, for example, a builder or a carpenter or an electrician, etc., etc. But what is most important is if you train, if you go back to the human capital theory, if you invest in training, the return are higher. So therefore, I will appeal to all our governments in Africa to really put resources, and more particularly to research and development, so that we can really make an impact on the skills development agenda that we have in the country.
We've seen not just some best practices, but some new practices. And the thread that runs out throughout all of these interventions, particularly when it comes to TVET, is lifelong learning. What does that mean for a young person that just wants employment, that just wants to get their job? How do you manage the fact that you could become obsolete, relevant today, outdated tomorrow? How do you maintain your relevance in TVET? Euphrasia?
You don't stop learning.
How do you not stop learning?
You have to keep upskilling and improving your skill. Earlier we spoke about the world changing and revolving. So if the world is changing and revolving and you choose to stay in the 90s, then you're left behind. So the best thing to do is to upskill, learn the skills as they come, and get the opportunities that come your way. Don't lag behind.
Lifelong learning is very important.
Yes.
Mr. Chris, what are some of your final sentiments? What does the future of WorldSkills look like in Africa, particularly for WorldSkills International? What does this idea of investment particularly look like, and what are some of the returns you're hoping for?
Well, let me actually use this organization, NBC, as an example. You've been broadcasting items from this show for the last couple of days. The phones have been running hot from other nations, because you're broadcasting around Africa, saying, well, how come we're not here? Now, seriously, this has been, I know it's been, I've been talking to your directors, and the calls are coming in saying, why were we left out? Well, the answer is they weren't. Everyone was invited. What this has done is actually shown other nations that this is something they want. Now, what WorldSkills needs to do, and we are in discussions with the African Union, other partners and the governments here, to say, well, look, let's bring more nations in, let's expand our operation, let's create a WorldSkills Africa organization that can actually draw in all those nations and design competitions that are right for Africa and right for African nations and right for African young people. That's what we can do, and that's our ambition.
Okay, I think we still have a few minutes, seconds to get the official word from the Republic's representative here today. Mr. Naanda, what is the hope that you're giving to young people? Because, you know, there's a lot of desperation sometimes for some sense of acknowledgement and opportunity, and you feel like you might be left out of this, you know, maybe an education house. How do you get yourself in, but not just how do you get yourself in, how do you ensure access to decent or dignity in terms of a decent work, but also in terms of dignity in life? How do young people do that, in a nutshell?
Patrick, I wouldn't want to use this platform to promote myself. And I want you to understand, and I want the youth to understand that. You know, when I left school, I really wanted to become an architect, but because of lack of opportunities, I couldn't do that. But then I decided, no, let me take up apprenticeship training. I trained as a welder. I qualified as a welder. And then I was working as a welder. And of course, after working as a welder, I developed a passion for TVET. And then I decided, no, let me venture into TVET. And we're talking about long life learning. And I decided to say, no, let me continue to learn. And today, I'm a doctor. I have a PhD in TVET. Now, what it tells you is TVET can create opportunities. And this is what we are trying to do with TVET, to really showcase the youth that if you do TVET, you can reach the sky, because the sky is the limit.
We're out of time, but I think this has been a very informative conversation. I think for me the big lesson is that very much for long or many youth, the opportunities have been limited, but guess what? TVET has come and opened up the field and ensure that everybody has an opportunity here in Namibia. So open your eyes and see the opportunities that are ahead. You can't be what you don't see, and we saw a young lady that has inspired us tonight. Gentlemen, lady, thank you very much. Until tomorrow night, Namibia, it's every night until Saturday or Friday, with a closing ceremony on Saturday. It's a good night.
Be a man of bravery. Kaukweka seke kwaha. Be a man of bravery. Kaukweka seke kwaha. This is what you are. Kaukweka sahoka. This is what you are. Kaukweka sahoka. Bayede inkosi. Bayede inkosi. Bayede inkosi. Bayede inkosi.
Bom 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 bom